All right, welcome back to our video series on ZWEIHÄNDER. Today we're going to go through the Arcane Magic deck. I get a lot of exciting things to show you today, and this is actually a complimentary video to our previous one for Divine Magic, which you've probably already purchased or seen the other video for. Here's a Divine Magic deck and how it comes through from Drive-Thru RPG. All 114 cards. Like we see here is the Arcane, and here's an extra set of Divine we actually have just for around our game table, but I'll set those to the side. As I mentioned before, there's no tuck box, unfortunately, because they do exceed the card limit for Drive-Thru RPG. However, we are going to work on a tuck box that you can download and assemble yourself. And we're hopefully going to be looking at some other options too next year as we move toward our next Kickstarter. To actually have some really awesome versions of these cards along with some custom tuck boxes. But for now, let's go ahead and go through our Arcane Magic. And first we're going to start actually with one of my favorite images in the entire deck, which is Sorcery. And I apologize, there's a little bit of a glare here from the light overhead over our game table. So with Sorcery, some of this imagery may look familiar to you. And flip through these, and just like the Divine Magic cards, these are arranged the same. So once again, you'll have a dominant color on the front and it'll be carried to the back, so there's no confusing these spells. In this case, we're looking at Basilisk Spittle. Look at that reagent, a vial of blood from your own race ingested. This is a really cool spell. This is actually was inspired by Reptile from Mortal Kombat. Really neat spell. We used it several times in our play test and still around our table. Once again, just like the previous video, you'll notice one skull means it's a petty magic spell. As we kind of go through these, you're going to see 1, 2, 3 skulls always means greater magic. And obviously 2 skulls means lesser magic. This is a fun spell here, Grotesque Miasma. Get a couple other His Dark Gift. And those of you who are familiar with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay will realize that a lot of these spells are inspired by the original game. You may see some familiar names and functions of these spells as we go through, but for now, we're going to go ahead and close out Sorcery, and we're going to go ahead and start moving through the rest of the deck. Second, we're going to move on to the Arcana of Astromancy. And keen-eyed Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay fans will once again recognize this image in the background, and I'll actually leave it up to you in the comment section to let us know what that may be. As a matter of fact, the first person who can comment and let us know what that building is inspired by, I'll actually send you this deck. It's yours. I'll send it to you in the mail right as soon as you answer, and we'll correspond by email. But let's go ahead and go through the Arcana of Astromancy. Once again, really cool imagery. And you'll notice, of course, the symbol that was in the core book is actually carried through all of these cards. So for Astromancy, Astral Bridge. Hey, that's pretty fitting. Once again, 3 skulls. That means it is a greater magic spell. And once again, like we said in the previous video, reagents are more expensive or more difficult to find for greater magic spells. They're a little easier for petty magic, but the more powerful the spell, the rarer the reagent will be. And that's kind of part of the adventure too, right? You kind of want to kind of encourage like casters to kind of have to track some of those down because these are very powerful spells in some cases. So Augury, here we go, look at that. 1 skull, and like I said before, if it's a petty magic spell, the reagent's going to be a little bit cheaper. Like, for instance, a liver of a bird. All you got to do is track down a pigeon or a crow or whatever it may be to find that reagent. Call Lightning, a vial of rainwater. Once again, easy to find. It's a petty magic spell. And of course, there are some other spells in here too, like Dooming, which is the reagent's a little more creative. The name of and a lock of hair from the intended victim. So that's an interesting reagent. Not something you just simply pick up at a shop or from a greengrocer or even really on the market. You actually have to kind of think about how you track some of these down. Now that being said, we are going to address a little bit more comprehensively how these reagents can be found in our next book, which we'll learn a little bit more about in 2018. But once again, we'll return back to our magic spell. So once again, this is the Arcana of Pyromancy, a really, really cool spell. And once again, the same imagery we saw in the ZWEIHÄNDER core book. Bolt of Flame. Any one person you can see. After immediately casting the spell, one foe immediately suffers 1d10 plus willpower bonus and damage from fire. You can inflict injuries with this magic, but they are set on fire instead. Now this is an interesting effect because you have several spells or things in the book that actually do this. That essentially means that you still roll a d6 chaos die to see if somebody suffers damage if they move down the damage condition track. Along moderately, seriously, grievously wounded. However, if you do, quote, inflict an injury, instead they actually just catch on fire for 3d10 plus 3 damage. So it's pretty damaging in some cases if somebody is obviously caught on fire. Being caught on fire is pretty bad. Cataclysmic Inferno, 3 skulls. Reagent, a rod of petrified wood. After casting this spell, you conjure a firestone that rages in place where you targeted it. All those who are caught within their explosion template who fail to resist with coordination suffer 3d10 plus 3 damage and fire. Pretty nasty. Very nasty. And you'll notice that spell actually lasts for 9 plus willpower bonus in minutes. So it actually continues to roil in place wherever the caster puts it. So kind of a cool, fun spell. Pyromancy is, I think, one of the more familiar arcana you'll find, in ZWEIHÄNDER. That obviously, has an analog to what's in Warhammer. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more damage intensive as far as it goes for our arcane lores in ZWEIHÄNDER, this is the one to go for. Cauterized Wound, unlike the others, this one's actually used to heal somebody, basically staunching bleeding and so forth. So we'll continue moving on. We'll look next at Shadowmancy. In Shadowmancy, this was originally actually called Illusion, but we actually kind of leaned away from that. Shadowmancy seemed a little bit more evocative, and what we wanted to do with it was a little bit more than just simply, casting illusions. Here we go, Adelcoved. That's where you can render somebody confused. The reagent being a mirror shattered onto the ground. There's another spell here, Death Mask. That's a fun one. It's a greater magic spell. An ivory death mask held to your face. That's really cool. As a matter of fact, you'll find that in the core book, the professional image actually has that ivory death mask over their face, if I recall. So that's kind of cool. Eternal Darkness. 2 skulls. It's a lesser magic spell. Eyes of a Salamander expended. So that's Shadowmancy. Here's a little peek at Umbral Knives before we go on. Once again, greater magic, reagents, 1 Castle Forged Dirk held before you. Kind of an expensive reagent to find, but certainly you could probably hire a blacksmith or even perhaps have one of your fellow adventurers craft it for you. So we move on to Luminescence. Once again, the symbol from the ZWEIHÄNDER core book. Banishment. Now you'll see that light yellow around the outside of the card. Once again, of course, it's carried on the front face of the card too, so that makes it very easy to kind of go through these cards and not get them confused with one another. Reagent, the true name of a creature you wish to banish spoken aloud. That's a challenging one right there. As you know, if you've read the Bestiary and a little bit in the Grimoire, finding a true name of a creature is very, very difficult, particularly for abyssal creatures like demons. For Restless Dead or Spirits, a little different, but nonetheless, we really kind of, once again, leaned into kind of those, what we kind of call puzzle monsters, meaning that simply whacking them with your weapon won't kill them, nor will whacking them with a weapon that's been, it's been blessed by magic. So, in some cases, for instance, in order to affect a demon, you have to know its true name to impact it with magic. In some cases with Restless Spirit, it's not just about simply killing the creature, but also, righting the wrong that turned them into a restless spirit. But banishment, of course, is kind of the answer to, if you are able to figure those things out or unsure what to do, this right here is what you can do to actually just kind of drive them away completely. But you will note that for possession actually only drives them out for 9 days, so not an end-all be-all spell, but once again kind of leans into that creativity we really like with monsters in the game, and why we see magic as, although magic is kind of world-breaking, it's meant to bend and break the rules in some cases. Some things you just can't defeat with magic. I'm rambling now, but we'll keep going on here through the cards. So Blinding Gaze, Cleansing Light, Coruscating Mantle. That's a fun one right there. So we'll continue moving on. We're about, I think, halfway through the cards now, which is great. Morticism. This is great. This is the quote, not necromancy magic, right? This is the kind of like the other side of necromancy, meant to bar or, you know, fight away the undead. At the threshold, your allies can deny death. That's a really cool spell. It's a greater magic spell too. And it has purple around the edge, which you see a purple, of course, near the symbol. It's on the front of the skull for Morticism. Banish Undead, like we said before. Morticism is really meant to kind of bar or protect those against restless spirits and the Walking Dead. Bereavement. This is neat. It's kind of it's a petty magic spell, but has, you know, not necessarily a combat-based, you know, effect, but no less potentially useful for story purposes. Dearly Departed, another fun one too, where you can actually ask a ask a spirit to answer questions yes, no. This one obviously is influenced by a Ouija board, and obviously you see a spirit board is actually required, but it kind of, once again, it's kind of a fun reagent, kind of a fun impact spell, and we really like the way that we've kind of treated some of these, because they're not just about dealing damage or fighting monsters. It's about, you know, what the world looks like beyond just combat, and all the Arcana leans into that. Actually, you'll find that there are maybe a handful of spells in the entire game that deal damage, and a rare few that actually heal damage. So a little different than most RPGs. Ashes to Ashes. This is actually true necromancy, as we mentioned before. This is very different than Morticism. This is true necromancy. This is meant to bolster and augment and even emulate, in the case of Banshee's Wail, abilities of the undead. So for instance, this should be kind of interesting. Banshee's Wail, greater magic spell. The veil of a wedding dress of a restless spirit. You actually are able to conjure forth her wail of anguish, and it does 3d 10+3 and mental peril. That's kind of fun. Again, Brush with Death. Another fun one too. The Hand of a Murderer held in a bag. Once again, leaning into that creativity of the reagents. Here's a Crippling Stare, the leg bone of a priest, which must be thrice broken. This is a really fun one. You know, every time that the bone is broken, it inflicts on a different injury to a foe on their turns. So it's kind of a continuous spell, but super cool. You'll notice the duration is called special because the necromancer actually has to break the bone 3 times between 3 turns to inflict 3 different injuries. Super neat. We will move on now to Transmutation, and I believe most of you have seen this image before because this is one of the early promo images we showed for the cards. And once again, all of these images are done by Ken Duquette, and they are just absolutely incredible. Just awesome images. First spell, Corrosion. Obviously, Transmutation focuses on transmutation of the physical and spiritual, so it's not just about simply changing into animals and things like that. Dancing Arrows, that's actually a damage spell, which is super fun. We've got Enchant Trapping. Here's your temporary, quote, magic item creation. And you'll note that, you know, once again, we don't really have real magic item creation in the game. In fact, magic items are either relics or artifacts are all very rare. So with Transmutation, actually begin to emulate some of that. Fool's Fortune. You can make things turn into something they really aren't. For instance, the reagent here is like a handful of pyrite sprinkled over the object. So you can make something look that maybe a fennec can look like it's made of gold. You can make something that's made of, you know, kind of rotted driftwood into like a really nice ironwood, which will actually be an interesting material we're adding to our next book. But regardless, you really make things look into something that is, for instance, a teetering wagon that looks like a shimmering crystal cart. For those who are familiar with the Disney movie, the Cinderella story, you know exactly what that is. Gird of Iron, and obviously others here. We'll move on next to Elementalism. And this one harkens back to some familiar themes from earlier versions of Warhammer. Blood of the Earth. Ceremonial Knife plunges into the patch of earth. Does some really cool stuff there. Got Bubbling Geyser, a Dowsing Rod. It's a greater magic spell, obviously. It does some crazy stuff. It actually throws people in the air, and they're knocked prone as they hit the ground. So it's a really kind of fun, interesting damage-based spell. Crown of Thorns, another one. We've got Earth and Strength, and a few other spells in here too. Ephemeral Whisper. And that brings us to our last of the Arcana, which is Animism. This, of course, being, you know, quote, wizardly or arcane spells. First up, we've got Feast for Crows. You can conjure forth a flock of murderous crows that chew and bite and gnaw, and they do damage. You've got Inhuman Fury. This is actually where you transform, I guess, in kind of like a partially anthropomorphic creature. You got Lemurian Polymorph. It's actually a duration forever. It's when you actually transfigure somebody into something entirely different. So in this case, you could say they're turned into a primordial version of its own race. So for instance, a human may look like a gorilla. An elf, for instance, may look like a small like house elf from like folklore mythology. A gnome may be turned into a garden gnome. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could really flavor this. It's kind of up to you as the player and the game master. Primeval Form, that's actually where you take the shape of something entirely different. You actually get to take the shapes like a bear, tiger, alligator, and in the bestiary, these are called man-eaters. But you get some of their attributes to add to yourself, although you do retain your mental attributes. A fun spell. Quoth the Raven, and several others. Naturally, as with a Divine Magic deck, we do have Journalist Petty Magic in here. Once again, Arcane and Divine casters all share the same bed of Journalist Petty Magic. So we've included these in here as well, and you're probably familiar with some of these already. Dispel Magic, I mean, you've seen that in, I think, our previous video. We've got Gust of Wind. We've got Hat Trick, pull something crazy mutated out of a hat or a pocket. That's a really fun spell. Haunting, and others. So, as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you, one of our dear viewers, can identify and tell us exactly what this castle is on the Astromancy card, I will send you this in the mail. Feel free to comment below or on our Facebook post. In the meantime, thank you once again for tuning in. We'll do a little drawback here so you can see all the cards once again. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll have another video up here soon of our Game Master screen to show you what that looks like. In the meantime, have happy gaming.